Hello and welcome. My name's Derek White. Some of you may know me as the Geek Preacher. I've been ministering at various tabletop and comic book conventions around the country for the last 12 years or so. I don't get to go as much as I used to because life doesn't allow me to do so. I am also a full-time United Methodist pastor and serve a church in Middle Tennessee. And as you can see, my bookshelves are empty because I'm going to be moving in a few weeks to a new appointment because that's what they do with United Methodist ministers. But I'm sure you're not interested in any of that right now. The reason I'm doing this video today is because I want to talk to you about the theology of games, or the theology of tabletop games specifically. I've talked to quite a few people over the last few weeks who have been asking me questions about it. In fact, I was at one of our annual conferences where I had a seminary professor come and want to ask me questions about tabletop gaming. He's a big Dungeons and Dragons fan and played it for a number of years back in the day and is thinking about getting back into it. I've talked to other clergy as well as just regular folks in the church. And Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games have once again seen a really huge resurgence in our culture. And so some people ask me, at times, Derek, why do you do this? Why do you minister in these places? I'm also a chaplain at one specific gaming convention, the GaryCon Gaming Convention, which is held in honor of Gary Gygax, one of the co-creators of Dungeons and Dragons. I've been that chaplain for a couple of years now. I've also been a volunteer there for even longer. And so I get a lot of questions about this, and a lot of other people are starting up or have been doing some sort of tabletop gaming ministry for quite some time. And so the question I get is, sometimes you get the question, what's the biblical basis of this, or why do you do this? What's your thinking behind it? Or do you have a reason, or is this just a fun hobby and you decided to mix your faith with it? So what I wanted to do today is do this video where I can talk a little bit about it. I've wanted to write about it, but I am a speaker. I'm a talker. That's what I do. That's how I process. I don't write as well as I think I should. And so I just wanted to talk about this today, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. Maybe you can share this with people at your church, or you could share this with your friends, or maybe share it with other gamers, whoever you'd like to share it with, if you find this interesting and helpful. So what is theology? First of all, is the question. What is theology? Theology is, of course, broken down simply as the study of God. But in this context, what I want to do is I want us to see how we can find God in the midst of all this, and why people are interested in these things. So first of all, I want to start out with what is probably one of the primary beliefs of the Christian faith, and that is what we call incarnation. And the idea is that God came into the world in Jesus Christ as a physical being. God was incorporated physically into this world. Some would even say God was physically incorporated into the universe by creating the universe in and of itself, and that God has integrally and physically been a part of all creation since the beginning of the cosmos. But most specifically for Christians, we look to the incarnation of Jesus Christ, the embodiment of God in human flesh. And what's that got to do with gaming? Well, I think it has a lot to do with it. I think it has to do with with human nature, and our desire for physicality, our desire to touch and to taste and to see. And so God entered into this world, and God was embodied, and embodiment is important to us. We like to experience the world. We like to touch things. We like to move things about. We like to eat and drink. And in the Christian faith, eating and drinking is one of our central beliefs in that we gather around a table, we have a shared meal, sometimes referred to as the Lord's table or Holy Eucharist, where we break bread and we drink wine or juice, whatever your tradition may do. And so this is another part of it. And in gaming, that's what we often do. That's when we call it tabletop gaming. Tabletop gaming is a way of being embodied and being around other people and spending time with other people. It is a way of being in a face-to-face dialogue with others and enjoying one another's company, much like Jesus did in his journey through the world. When we look in the Gospels, we see that Jesus was often ostracized by certain leaders because they said he ate with tax collectors and sinners. He was accused of being a drunkard, or in some older translations they say a wine bibber. What a fun expression, wine bibber. But Jesus was accused of this because he spent time with a wide variety of people. And he spent time with them around the table, because it's at a table that we talk and we meet others and we grow. King David in the Old Testament said in Psalm 23, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And yet I have found at a gaming table, sometimes we do make a few enemies, but most of the time friendships are made and friendships grow. And so this incarnational and even sacramental element of being at table is where we learn to play, where we learn to talk, where we learn to be with one another. And so as an embodied people, this is important. Now, back to that embodiment, I have seen over the past few years a real resurgence in tabletop games. And I've read a number of studies. I'm not going to link to them, but you can find them. A number of articles are out there, and my own personal experience validates this as well. In that I have seen there are quite a few people, many people, who say the reason they are enjoying and getting into tabletop games is because they felt depersonalized in our internet world. They felt like they haven't been able to connect with people on a personal level because they have a screen blocking them. They're not able to physically interact with them. And I don't know what my computer's doing. Hopefully this video is recording all right. We'll see. I was getting a little lag on my end, but everything looks to be okay now. It looks like it's caught back up. But what I'm trying to say is that embodiment is essential for us, and spending time with one another is essential for us. And in our world today, we have less face-to-face interactions than we used to. And yet, tabletop gaming sees a resurgence. Gaming conventions such as Gen Con and Origins and Gary Con are seeing record growth time and time again. And this is because people want to gather together and have fun together. They want to see other people. And I've read articles on this. I've seen some research on this. But more than that, I've talked to people and I've asked them, I said, why do you come to these places? And they said, well, I want to be a part of a community. I want to meet people. I want to spend time with people face to face. Those people I've met on the other side, that are on the other side of the computer screen, I get to meet them and see them and talk to them. And that's what's essential. And that is an essential part of my faith and my Christian journey, is getting to know people and building community with them and building relationships with them, not just communicating with them via the internet or via my cell phone or text messages. I want to spend time with people. And I believe that's what Jesus wanted. I believe in his journey through life, that's what he epitomized, was a God who was in relationship with others, a God who spent time with others. And this is part of the core of the theology of tabletop gaming that I'm talking about. A God who has entered the world to be among his people. And if his people have God living in them, they want to enter the world and be among other people. They want to spend time with them. They want to be a good neighbor. They want to be a good friend. These are important, essential things in our journey. And that's what I hope you'll see. And if you're a Christian who is watching this video, I hope that you'll see part of your calling is to just build communities of love and compassion, communities of help and hope. And I could share story upon story of how the gaming community has rallied around others and helped others, raised money to fight cancer, raised money to help people whose homes have been burned down, raised money to help people who have suffered various tragedies around the world. But there are also groups out there in the gaming community that are helping people with autism get better in touch with society. They help people with autism work in making connections, because sometimes when you're on the autism spectrum, you don't always connect to people the same as other people do. And I say that as a father of an autistic child, and I have watched tabletop gaming. I've seen tabletop gaming help my own son communicate better and share stories better. I've seen it allow my son to dialogue with people on a level that he might not have been able to without these games. They allow him to connect. They allow him to talk. And there's also some other really practical aspects of tabletop gaming in this making connections. I remember a number of years ago I was speaking with a doctor who I'd played Dungeons and Dragons with, and we were talking. That's right, Dungeons and Dragons has all types of people playing: doctors, lawyers. I've had plumbers, electricians, mechanics. Played with a wide variety of people, all at the same table. And this doctor came up to me. He had just gone into practice maybe a year before. And he said, "Derek, you know what I love about Dungeons and Dragons?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, Derek," he said, "it taught me how to deal with people." I said, "What do you mean?" You see, my friend, this doctor, had played Dungeons and Dragons in those games that were really political and had lots of machinations and talking and a lot of just subterfuge going on. And so he really liked those political games that they would talk about and those political stories, and the characters that he would play in the stories would interact with other characters, and he would have to learn his way around this political situation. And he said, "Derek, that helped me, man, because when I opened my own practice and I got into my own office, if it wasn't for Dungeons and Dragons, I wouldn't have known how to deal with the office politics that have arose." He said that these office politics got crazy. He didn't even expect it, but his time in playing those games when he was younger helped him deal with what was going on in his office. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. But that's what games like these do. They help us connect. They help us learn. They help form us. And that's another thing that's important about these games, is that they're formational. These games such as Dungeons and Dragons and a wide variety of other role-playing games, things like Traveller, which is a science fiction role-playing game, Gamma World, one of the old apocalyptic games. They can teach us how to deal with people, but they can also form us on a spiritual level. They can form us in our lives. It can teach us virtues such as courage and temperance, knowing when to wait, patience, things like that. You can pick up these things in these games just like you pick them up from the stories of old, and use these things in your life and begin to change. That's one of the things we can do as Christians, is we can begin to share virtues in the games, virtues of caring for the weak and the hurting and the broken, and we can show those things in a game, and we can use those activities in a game to show how important it is to care for the hurting, the broken, and the weak, for the strong to stand up for those who might not be able to stand up for themselves. An essential part of our Christian journey. Now, lastly, I want to just talk about the image of God in all of this. In Latin, it's called the imago Dei. and imago is where we get the word imagination. And this is an essential part, I think, of being a Christian and a gamer, is to realize that everyone is made in the image of God, but also that everyone is a part of the imagination of God, meaning everyone is a part of God's story. And when you're a part of God's story, you want to share God's story with other people. So I want to read you a quote from J.R.R. Tolkien, what he had to say about story. He said, "What really happens is that the story maker proves a successful sub-creator. He makes a secondary world which your mind can enter. Inside it, what he relates is true. It accords with the laws of the world. You therefore believe it, while you are, as it were, inside. The moment disbelief arises, the spell is broken. The magic, or rather art, has failed. You are then out in the primary world again, looking at the little abortive secondary world from outside. Every writer, and I would add every storyteller, making a secondary world wishes in some measure to be a real maker, or hopes that he or she is drawing on reality, hopes that the peculiar quality of this secondary world are derived from reality or are flowing into it." This is what we are. We are sub-creators. God has created the universe. God has created a wonderful story. And we want to be a part of that story, but we also want to create as well. And I believe that's something God has placed in us as image bearers of God. We want to create our own stories. We want to tell our own stories. We want to share our own stories. And we want them to touch and flow through the real world. And this is a part of the creative process. It's also a deep part of the theology of tabletop gaming. It's about creating and telling stories and being part of God's creative purposes in the world, creating something new and beautiful and exciting, creating something redemptive and hopeful and glorious. This, my friends, is what I hope to bring. This is what I hope to do. And this week I'll be making my own pilgrimage to a gaming convention in Columbus, Ohio. It's the Origins Game Fair, and I'm looking forward to it. I don't get to go to Origins very often, and I just happen to have Father's Day weekend off this year. And I get to go to these conventions. I get to meet people and share with people and show them I love them and care about them. And this is the last thing I'll try and leave you with. Another great part of the theology of gaming is that it breaks down all barriers, barriers of nation, barriers of race, even barriers of religion that we put up so very often. We put up these barriers and they are destroying our world, they're destroying our relationships. But at the gaming table, we're all the same. At the gaming table, we all come together. And at the gaming table, we can share the love of Jesus just by being a good friend, playing a game, and being a good person. And we can show that love and kindness by our actions and by our words and by our deeds. I hope you have found this video helpful. I hope maybe more in the future I'll try and do more things like these. Again, my life sometimes gets chaotic and strange, and I'm not able to do this as much as I'd like, but I hope that you'll find some way within your church, within your community, wherever you are, to really see the need for bringing more and more games into the world and seeing the need for sitting down around a table, sharing some Cheetos and some sodas and whatever it is you like to eat with your friends, and making new friends and inviting new friends to the table, because that's what it's about. And I believe on that final day, in that resurrection life, we're all going to gather around the table. We're all going to be eating a banquet, and we'll all maybe even be playing some games as we continue this great creative process God has called us into. God bless you. Take care, and may the Lord be with you always.